Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. I'm Rosanna Francescato, Communications Director with the Clean Coalition, and we're excited to host this webinar today on a proactive approach to mass electrification of existing buildings. So, before we get into that, a few quick housekeeping items. We will email everyone the webinar recording and slides within a couple of business days. Also, all of our webinars are archived on our website, clean-coalition.org, under events. If you have questions at any time during the webinar, please go ahead and type them in the question pane at the right of your screen. We'll answer as many questions as we can during the Q&A, which will follow the presentations. And if you have questions about the Clean Coalition, you can contact me at rosanna@clean-coalition.org. Now, I want to start by briefly setting the stage for today's webinar, including who the Clean Coalition is and what we're about. The Clean Coalition is a nonprofit organization, and our mission is to accelerate the transition to renewable energy and a modern grid. Our endgame vision is that we will get to 100% renewable energy within the next 2 decades, and obviously the sooner the better. And at the Clean Coalition, we're focused on the 25% of that endgame that we believe needs to come from local renewable sources, which bring a host of benefits. But we do believe there's a very important role for remote energy generation in the transmission system in coordination with local renewables to get us to 100% renewable energy. You may be wondering what this has to do with electrification. Well, if we're going to get to 100% renewable energy, we have to electrify everything. We can't run anything on fossil fuels. And most people are aware, for example, that we need to drive electric, but many people still don't know that they can also fully electrify their homes and businesses. And this is crucial. We can't get to 100% renewable energy with some of our major appliances still running on fossil fuels. As David Roberts has said in the great climate policy feast, clean electrification is the entree. Everything else is a side. And clean electrification means we clean up the electricity grid by replacing fossil fuel power plants with renewable energy and energy storage, which we focus on at the Clean Coalition. We clean up transportation by replacing gas and diesel powered vehicles with electric vehicles. And we clean up buildings by replacing furnaces and other appliances that run on fossil fuels with appliances that run on electricity. This webinar will focus on number 3, cleaning up buildings, which, by the way, generate nearly 40% of CO2 emissions, with nearly 30% of that coming from building operations as opposed to materials and construction. Now, it's actually cheaper to build new buildings all electric, and more builders are starting to see that. But retrofitting existing buildings is very challenging, and that's why we need programs like Be Smart. I'm a good example of that. I live in a house in Oakland, California. We put solar on our roof, but we haven't switched to heat pump heater or water heater because they're so expensive, and also a lot of contractors still aren't really familiar with heat pumps. So a program like Be Smart would make it possible for me and many others like me to finally make the switch in a really painless way. So I'm really excited about the Be Smart program, and we need to get utilities and CCAs to adopt programs like these so more people can electrify. So we need to get the word out about programs like Be Smart. So now I'd like to introduce our presenters for today. Bruce Hodge is an environmental activist, fine art photographer, and computer scientist. He founded Carbon Free Palo Alto in 2011 and played a crucial role in convincing the city of Palo Alto to provide carbon neutral energy to all utility customers. Since then, he's worked to keep Palo Alto in the vanguard of cities striving to implement a low carbon energy future by focusing on strategies like community solar and mass beneficial electrification, which you'll hear about today. Brett Anderson is a consultant and activist who develops and promotes innovative, scalable policy and program solutions for climate protection that can create more just and purposeful communities. He currently focuses on building decarbonization policy advocacy as a board member of Carbon Free Palo Alto and Carbon Free Silicon Valley. His past sustainability-related projects include neighborhood carbon footprint reduction, clean tech startup financing, alternative commuting, and environmental education. You can read more about our presenters on the event listing for this webinar on our website, and we will send everyone the link to that, which will include the webinar recording and slides within a couple of business days. So now I'm going to turn it over to Bruce to start today's presentation. Okay, go ahead, Bruce.
Great, thank you. Thank you, Rosanna. Okay, hopefully everybody can see our slides.
Yes.
And I want to thank Clean Coalition and Rosanna and Craig for hosting our webinar tonight. So thank you very much, and hope everybody, and thanks to the people that are attending this presentation, taking valuable time out of their Thursday morning to check out Be Smart. So Be Smart, what is it? It's a proactive approach to mass beneficial electrification, or BE for short, of existing buildings. And so we're going to cover what is Be Smart and what does it solve. We're going to present a proposal for a pilot that could be implemented by virtually any electric utility. And hopefully we'll have some time for questions and discussion. And so what are our goals, strategies, and tactics? And so our goal is really mass electrification, which is replacing the majority of existing fossil fuel devices in both residential and commercial buildings in the next 10 years. And the strategy is to make it easy and economical for all customers to replace their fossil fuel devices that are reaching their end of life with BE, beneficial electrification devices. And the tactic that we're pursuing is to introduce Be Smart, which is a direct installation solution with on-bill financing, and which balances customer benefit with cost recovery from the utility point of view. And so what are the challenges of mass electrification? Well, first and foremost, we pretty much run out of time. These are all quotes from David Roberts of Vox. There's no time left in a 1.5 or 2 degree scenario for more fossil fuel infrastructure. And so we really need to, radically ramp up the production of these electrification technologies. So you can see the chart on the right shows different mitigation pathways that we could follow, and they're sort of marked in ranges 1.5, 2, and 3. And you can see the straight lines superimposed on those. Those straight lines correspond to different mitigation strategies that we can follow. So ideally, we'd like to have a strategy that corresponds to, say, this green line, or perhaps even the cyan line over here. And so those lines actually correspond, here's the labels to them. And so the cyan one, the green one that I was pointing out initially, was early retirement, then 100%. So in other words, we retire existing devices immediately, and all new devices that go in are 100%. The cyan line is the 100% replacement at end of life, which is what we're suggesting with the Be Smart strategy. This is a variation on a production ramp, which is probably more realistic, and then 100%. You can see that over here is a host of different strategies that are being currently deployed right now. There's the invisible hand of the free market, there's a low carbon tax, a small market subsidy, and a high carbon tax. All these were modeled out, and they show that they just don't really get us to where we need to be in terms of a livable future. So massive electrification does require this more robust approach. So for example, in the Bay Area, approximately 200,000 fossil fuel water heaters per year are replaced at their end of life. And this adds more than $200 million to the base of potentially stranded fossil fuel assets devices in the Bay Area each year. And so really using electric equivalents for all of these replacements from now on is the most realistic way to eliminate most of these devices by 2030. And this also has to be done equitably for homes and businesses of all income levels. And so the current, business as usual replacement rates are really inadequate. And so there was a study that was done by the Menlo Park Environmental Quality Commission, which showed that even if you start deploying fairly aggressive rebates, it just doesn't really generate the kind of replacement rates that are needed to electrify the majority of the water heater fleet in the next 10 years. So, but by contrast, if we essentially replace all fossil fuel devices that reach their end of life with BE devices, then that does achieve the goal that Menlo Park has set for itself, which is currently a 90% reduction by 2030. And mass electrification is also going to require regulatory solutions. So we really backed ourselves into a very short timeline, and that means that we need these regulatory solutions in addition to a comprehensive program like Be Smart that removes the main barriers to adoption of electric devices. And so we believe that Be Smart as a first step can enable the introduction of regulatory approaches that will further accelerate the adoption and market development. And so what are the barriers to mass electrification? Well, we all know that there are high upfront costs for the installation of beneficial electrification devices. These costs include, interestingly, not only the cost of the device, but the installation cost and also the soft cost, which is the permit fees and other time spent essentially pushing around bureaucratic paperwork. And soft costs are actually very high right now in the Bay Area. There's also a split incentive issue where associated with renters versus landlords, where landlords are not really incented to upgrade equipment because they don't really experience the benefits of installing these devices. And the installation is fairly complex and time consuming, and it's not a priority for most consumers. A lot of folks don't really even know how their water is heated, and that fossil fuels generally are involved in heating your water. We also have the fact that emergency replacements are the norm, especially for hot water heaters. People just wait until they fail, and then you're in a big rush to replace it. And because of that in the current state of the market, that favors replacement with gas devices, unfortunately. And we also have mispriced gas and electric rates that disfavor beneficial electrification by ignoring carbon costs and the potential benefits of time of use costs for electricity. And so rebates are really inadequate. Rebates are the current mechanism that is being deployed right now. So even large rebates don't help low and moderate income residents that don't have the additional capital needed to participate. In other words, the rebate is only covering part of the total cost. They don't really reduce the complexities of electrification for building owners. It's still a bit of a process to do this replacement. And they're very expensive. They don't really, from the utility point of view, they don't really scale beyond the early adopters. So, for instance, Silicon Valley Clean Energy's heat pump water heater rebate will cost the utility $2 million, and that only covers 1,000 of the 20,000 water heaters that fail every year in their territory. And so if you scale that out to the Bay Area, that works out to be around $400 million per year in rebates. And this is assuming a $2,000 rebate per water heater, which is what Silicon Valley Clean Energy and others are offering right now. And this is a cost, an absolute cost from the utilities perspective with no recovery. And it's difficult, if not impossible, to apply to all customers over a 13-year period, which is the average lifetime of a water heater. And so what is the solution? Well, obviously we're proposing Be Smart. And so Be Smart is really a proactive approach to implementing beneficial electrification and uses marketing, finance, and operational elements to jumpstart and accelerate the adoption of ultra-efficient electric devices. And so in the conception of Be Smart, the utility employs a proactive approach for replacing fossil fuel devices. So they identify all the customers that have fossil fuel devices that are reaching their end of life, and then they're offered a direct installation service that takes care of all the details. And the utility negotiates volume installation contracts to control costs. And we believe that both electric utilities and CCAs are uniquely qualified to drive this effort because of their strength in managing capital-intensive infrastructures over extended periods of time and the maintaining of long-term service relationships with their customers. Another leg of Be Smart is that the utility would offer tariffed on-bill financing to its customers. So TOB is an inclusive financing approach that has been shown to have very high adoption rates when applied to energy efficiency programs. And so the customer avoids high upfront costs by making monthly payments on their utility bill. And the charge is structured as an additional tariff paid by the current utility customer and not as a personal debt. And so this tariff is attached to the utility meter, and basically any current utility customer in good standing qualifies. And so then the utility uses its access to low-cost long-term capital to finance these installations. And the total financed amount is capped to manage the monthly payment affordability and credit risk. And so now I'm going to turn it over to Brett, and he's going to give you more details about how Be Smart works.
All right, thanks, Bruce. Can you hear me?
Yes.
All good. All right, and thanks to Craig and Rosanna of the Clean Coalition for this opportunity to talk. So to start with, Be Smart really places the responsibility on the utilities to proactively orchestrate the replacement of soon-to-fail fossil fuel devices with beneficial electrification devices through a direct install program. So it's important to note here that the utility has the end-to-end responsibility and interest in making sure that a connected electric device that's interactive with the grid is installed successfully, used successfully, and retired successfully. So that really places the utility kind of in the driver's seat to coordinate a complete solution and motivates kind of solving the problems along the way. So the replacement process would be designed to be very quick and easy for the customer. And the customers would be responsible to pay the initial outlay equal to the business as usual cost of replacing the device with another fossil fuel device. So for instance, in a gas water heater situation, the typical cost for replacing that with a gas water heater would come out of the pocket of the customer or the building owner in this case. And the difference between that device installation cost, that is for the heat pump, and the business as usual outlay is financed at a low interest rate. So less than 2%, hopefully 0% for all customers with no credit checks. So we think this is fundable through the additional revenue generated by these electric devices. Next slide. So to continue the feature description here of what we're talking about, the term of the loan would be set to the average lifetime of the device, so much longer than a typical, say, 5-year payback on a home equity loan or other device. The maximum financed amount would depend on the device type, so you'd, of course, pay back more for a water heater than a dryer, and then a heat pump space heater more than a water heater, for example. The monthly payments would be financed and added to the utility bill as a tariff. So this would be kind of a cost recovery mechanism rather than a loan to a customer. And those operational savings then between the would-be gas bill and the electricity bill would offset this tariff amount each month for the customer. For renters and low and moderate income owners, the utility would offer a fixed monthly BE discount on their bill because we have to recognize here that these will not be cash positive in terms of bill savings for many of these installations. But ideally, this low and moderate income discount would result in no increase in the bill for those customers. So that would be kind of a means tested approach to making sure equity is served in this process. Next slide. So to go through an example here, what we're talking about is an installation cost of a heat pump water heater, and BSmart keeping the cost to the building owner at the outlay that would be there for the business as usual, and it would keep it lower than it would be in the case of rebates. For example, Silicon Valley Clean Energy is the example we used earlier. With a $2,000 rebate for heat pump water heater is pretty generous rebate, but it still means that a customer today would pay more out of pocket than business as usual. So you'll see in the second column there under the rebate scenario, a $3,500 installation cost for heat pump water heater. The customer saves $2,000 on the rebate, but still is paying out of pocket $1,500 rather than the $1,200 business as usual charge. So the BSmart column, which would be a third for that installation, would require an outlay from the customer equal to the business as usual, so the $1,200, and then the remainder, $1,800, would be recovered with that tariff charge on the bill, tariff on bill financing. So note that the $3,000 in the BSmart installation compared to the rebate scenario is because of the economies of scale for business for BSmart, where the installed cost would be decreased by $500 through volume contracting within 12 to 24 months. Some installations may cost more, so we could see scenarios of $4,500, maybe even more. But even in those cases, it's better to go with BSmart and have that difference financed on the bill than have a generous rebate of $2,000. You could be out as much as $2,500 in that case if you're a building owner, compared to, again, $1,200 in the case of BSmart. So this, the importance here of competitive contractor management is keeping those costs low. So that's a critical aspect here, is a direct install volume contracting model for the utility. Next slide. So looking at the monthly bill, here's another example in the territory we're talking about, Silicon Valley Clean Energy. That's the Santa Clara County area in the Bay Area, where the electricity rate is about 26 cents a kilowatt hour. Average gas is $1.66. And that results in operational savings estimated in a typical home of about $10 a month. So in the business as usual column, first column, you see $38. That's what it costs for gas today for a water heater in a typical home. Moving to the rebate, you'll see that the electricity cost is less than that at 28, so there's a $10 savings. Now, if we take an installation cost of $3,000 and turn that into a tariff charge, that adds to the electricity bill, and then you're over business as usual in that case. And then as you increase the installation cost under a BSmart program where we're financing with tariff on bill, you can see that there's a small amount each month increasing with that installation cost that the customer would be liable to pay. So this would be the case for a typical customer, and we think this is affordable for many people who are adopting and are not in the low income category. Next slide. So what we've done is kind of included the concept of a monthly discount for low to moderate income customers or renters that would not be, that we probably shouldn't subject to paying increased bills for an upgrade that happened in their building. So where the monthly bill is expected to be higher with the tariff on-bill charge, we would provide a discount. And this graph shows a discount of $10 a month. So that does result in savings for B-Smart, the B-Smart column, $8 in a $3,000 installation, $2 in a $4,000 installation. But of course, there's a point where if it's so expensive, you're still going to have to pay above and beyond the business as usual. So we have to be careful about managing costs and, of course, qualifying customers for the installation. Next slide. So taking the perspective now to the utility, we're looking at financing water heater replacements at the large scale proactive approach. And in the example of the rebate, this cost would largely quickly balloon into the area of, say, $20 million, again, in this Silicon Valley Clean Energy Santa Clara area. So just to finance half of the installations that happen each year. So 10,000 installations estimated for this area would cost $20 million. Now that's out of pocket and it's a net dead loss for the utility. But crucially, B-Smart then allows the utility to recover that cost. So it not only lowers that cost to about 18 million through volume contracting, but it allows that to be fully recovered over the life of that loan or that the life of that equipment. And then we've included here, say, a 1.5 million B-Smart cost for running the program. So the net effect here is that, largely the cost of this program is recovered over time and spread evenly across the customer base who's benefiting from it. Next slide, Bruce, thanks. So again, from the utilities perspective, this is kind of just doing the math, so to speak, on a capital account that would have to be invested in this incremental cost for replacing gas water heaters with heat pumps. If we look at 260,000 heat pumps in this area, that's about $36 million each year to replace those water heaters. But that amount gets offset then by the revenue that starts coming in from these tariff charges that are on the bill. And so the graph really illustrates that at the peak, you've got $250,000 worth of capital, certainly $250 million worth of capital invested. And then that declines back to zero. So your capital balance as it gets paid back. So within 25 years, 26 years, double the life of a heat pump water heater, you've completely financed the upgrade of the installed base. Next slide. So a few comments here about financing these replacements and another program that's been implemented around the US called Pay As You Save, which is also a tariffed on bill program. It also includes direct installation, but there's some contrasting points here with B-Smart, what we're proposing. So B-Smart is focused on proactive decarbonization, while PAYS is focused on energy efficiency. So there's some constraints there in the PAYS world where cost effectiveness is key, and that's because of mostly because of low and moderate income concerns and equity. But today, of course, we have this challenge of cost effectiveness for fuel switching scenarios. So we need to make this work for all customers, and we have to be able to finance installations that are not cost effective as well as cost effective. I think the final comment here, last point on the slide would be leveraging that incoming revenue. So making sure that we take advantage of the capital that's being expended would have otherwise be spent on gas devices to achieve that equity, and then using the revenue from say a utility tax or perhaps a revenue bond to subsidize those customers that would see an impact, negative impact on their monthly bill. So PAYS doesn't offer that kind of a discount model and is somewhat restricted in that sense. Next slide. So what we're trying to do with BSmart is really move beyond this kind of rebate response, which is the typical response to try and develop markets. It's going beyond the typical utility approach to distribute the cost of electrification equity among the private and public sectors. So really leveraging capital that's already being going to be spent otherwise on gas installations. It provides a blueprint for large-scale building electrification and can be expanded to multiple device classes. So we've covered heat pump water heaters here, but this works as well for heat pump space heaters, could be working for heat pump dryers, could work for cooktops, so it can be expanded to different device classes. But what it does is it kind of wraps it up in a direct installation from beginning to end by the utility so that the cost can be reduced at every point in the process. And that public utility then is leveraging the private business as usual investment to achieve the replacement rates of thousands per year that we need. Next slide. So let's spend a couple minutes describing a pilot that we've been presenting to various parties around the Bay Area in our network. The pilot can be implemented by one or more utilities or CCAs, and these joint pilots could be encouraged, but they wouldn't be required. Any utility could probably take this on their own. The utility provides some initial capital for the installation. So for example, through the reserves, this capital could be invested in these installations and recovered over time, but quickly the utility would probably have to seek more funding from revenue bonds or some other mechanism to finance the capital. But there's a very low write-off rate, and it's a very low interest rate proposition for capital lending. I think that the 1 million number we came up with, I think, was yes, that was designed to get us to about 500 devices per utility, and that's amount that we are seeing some utilities are able to come up with for direct installation or on-bill financing programs at this point. Next slide. So the goal of the pilot would be to acquire 500 customers to replace their end-of-life water heaters with heat pump water heaters. The idea there is to validate the key elements of BSmart. That would be the participation of low to moderate income customers to ensure that the program is accessible and attractive to those citizens from all income levels. There would be participation by landlords and renters to test this split incentive hypothesis. And then finally, a successful utility cost recovery mechanism that could be scaled to multiple devices and different customer classes. And of course, the idea is to scale it based on the findings of the pilot. Next slide. So looking at the role of the utility here in a little bit more detail, the utility would receive the additional revenue from the increased sales, and of course would have to come up with the capital to cover the installation for the outlays, either by seeking some bonds or through its own reserves. And it would enter contracts with customers to provide the direct installation of the devices. And then there's a lot of third-party interaction here, where the third parties would be contracted to provide some of the design, the administration, management, to oversee the installation of the heat pump water heaters and provide some technical analysis there. to manage the contractors themselves and manage the customer acquisition and relationships and marketing and communication process. This has to be a proactive program geared toward avoiding emergency replacements. So getting people to do planned replacements is key to manage costs and get systemic replacement schedules. Other perspectives, from a customer's perspective here, they're reducing their carbon footprint by approximately half. That number is kind of the ballpark figure for gas consumption today in a typical, say, single family home in our area. Gas water heaters are consuming about the same as the space heating in that sense. It avoids the water damage from a heat pump water, gas water heater failure. So these failures are not always, costless to end users. There's emergency replacement costs, but there's also damage from the failure of the tank. The new device would be installed with little effort on their part, and the customer then gets an interactive device that can take advantage of time of use rates. The municipality gains by being able to contribute significantly to reduce the community's carbon footprint. They can help with streamlining the permitting process, the marketing and communication of the program and the climate goals, and to aid with the customer acquisition by providing the permitting data or other data on the built environment. And then from the contractor's perspective here, they're benefiting from this whole kind of renewal of the building energy systems to renewable energy. And they're reducing their customer acquisitions costs. So that can be about 10% of revenue. So contractors are much more interested in dealing with volume contracts that have some guaranteed amount of work for them, so they can invest proactively in the skills and training to lower the cost and provide more service. Next slide, please. A couple reference projects here. So we're starting to see elements in this area, elements of B-Smart kind of coming into place. They're not coming all at once yet, but we've got on-bill financing now that's hitting in a few CCEs. So Sonoma Clean Power is rolling out a pilot program aimed at existing building efficiency and electrification. I think that program's actually already in place and running right now, but the main feature is up to $10,000 loans for any current SCP customer in good standing for qualified installations, and those include water heating and space heating. The payback period is also 10 years on these loans, and so that makes it a quite low monthly payment for customers. In contrast, our B-Smart proposal, though, is proposing tariffed on-bill financing to address the split incentive issue and employ a more proactive approach for replacing these devices. So the Sonoma Clean Power one is, of course, completely voluntary, and they're introducing it through various marketing mechanisms, including a center where customers can visit and see these devices. Next example, yes, Rewiring America. So we're very consistent with the messaging going out by Rewiring America. Bruce introduced this concept at the beginning of 100% replacement at end of life as really what we need to get to as soon as possible. So we just can't do this without a program like B-Smart that makes this easy and affordable for all customers. And that in turn enables a municipality or other regional organization to pass mandates or standards that would require this type of these measures to be taken by customers. So we need to ensure this universal access to these technologies by making it easy, but also a standard for replacement. Next slide. So in conclusion, we're putting B-Smart out there as a more innovative approach for utilities to go to the idea of rolling this out as infrastructure, say behind the meter for folks, all folks who have an electric meter, and distribute those costs equitably among all the public and private sectors over time. It's a roadmap for building electrification at scale. It can be expanded to multiple devices and customers. And it optimizes those costs of electrification by operating at scale and focusing on cost reduction at every point in the process. So again, returning to that idea of utility really having interest from end-to-end cost recovery and electrification sales, and all of the services that can be used on a connected interactive grid with these types of devices deployed. One more slide, I believe. Yes, and the main point being here that we have to scale this, and we can't afford it to do it in the business as usual mode of rebates and allowing market forces to take their own course. B-Smart could be applied at a regional and state level, virtually in all electric utility service territories, as a major driver of the transition for decarbonization in our energy future. I think that's it. Thank you very much for your attention, and we hope there's a few questions that we can answer.
Yes, thank you very much, Bruce and Brett, and there are quite a few questions. First, a couple people asked if this also applies to just air heaters, and I think you've pretty much covered that, but I just want to clarify, you've used water heaters as an example, but this could apply to anything, right? And you know, would that even include induction stoves, for example?
Right.
Yes, that's true. I think we are focusing on heating, first water heating, of course, space heating, because that's the vast bulk of gas use and emissions. But also, of course, we want to capture those dryers and cooktops.
Great. John Knox asks, as far as a B-Smart installation goes for people with gas water heaters, and I assume this would apply to anything, are you factoring in the cost of an electrician to run an electrical line, cap off gas, and possible upgrade electrical panel? I think you are factoring all those in, but can you confirm?
Yeah, that was part of the range of installation costs that you saw. Some of those would include a circuit, some of those a circuit might not be required. When you replace the whole electrical panel, there's probably another mechanism you want to put in place to make sure that that's able to be done as well, and maybe financed even at a longer term, because those will last 30 years or the life of the home completely.
Great, and related, Jim Lazar asked, one can buy a new heat pump water heater at Home Depot or Lowe's for about $1,000. Why is it costing $3,000 installed? And does that have to do with all those costs we just alluded to?
Yes, yes, and the soft costs also were, as I mentioned, are very high. In some municipalities, it requires both an electric and a plumbing permit. And basically, all the things associated with inspection and getting a permit and the requirements that people have to go through now in order to get a rebate all add tremendously to the cost. So it's a combination of the installation cost and the soft cost and the cost of the device. So interestingly, the cost of the device is really sort of the least issue.
I'd like to add one more point to that is, again, the volume contracting is key here, because volume contracting not only gives you economy of scale, but it allows you to, with certified contractors, almost eliminate the permitting and inspection cycle. So that's a very big reduction. It reduces, of course, the marketing and customer acquisition costs. And we already have data from SMUD and a few other cases where they have negotiated volume of, say, guaranteed volume contracts, and they were able to decrease the installation cost by 50% already. So we've got today we've got some supply chain issues that are really kind of perturbing the ability to get things done at a reasonable rate. But once those are ironed out, I think we have very high confidence that the cost can be lowered vastly by a structured, volume contracting approach.
Great. Jennifer DeMoy asked, this financing addressed installation. What about operational costs? Depending on local gas electric rates, the resident might spend more or less to operate the electrical equipment. How is this factored in? And I would guess in general it's going to cost less to operate because it's not just that it's electric versus gas, but they're much more efficient, right?
Correct. It really depends on the difference between the electricity rate and the gas rate. But what's happening here in California anyway is it's clear that the projections into the future are projecting gas prices to go up substantially. And so in some cases, you can definitely expect operational savings. And in other cases right now, it's actually a bit of a cost because of the high electricity prices that we have here in California. But all these things are sort of on the table and are moving around, but we expect that as time goes by, that the operational costs of electric devices will definitely, in the end, be less than the operational costs of gas devices.
Great. Tanya Srebotniak asks, in states, regions where the electricity grid is still very dirty, like Utah, Wyoming, Kansas, would this approach at least initially increase greenhouse gas emissions due to the shift from cleaner burning natural gas to electricity generated from coal?
I can take that. So the as far as the heating goes, so the heat pump, water heaters, heat pump space heaters, they are so efficient that you will emit less greenhouse gases by generating at a central station from natural gas, the electricity, and using that to power these devices in your home. That is much less carbon intensive than burning the gas in the device in the home. So we're better off with a central gas generating facility and using these electric heat pump devices than we would be by keeping the old gas heaters. So that's just by virtue of the fact that they're 4 to 6 times as efficient as a gas device.
Great.
Yeah,
go ahead.
Just wanted to add on very quickly to that. So one thing that is often not reported in association with gas emissions is that there are methane leaks in the system. So there's a substantial methane leakage, and methane is a potent greenhouse gas in its own right. It has it's 86 times more potent than CO2 over a 20-year lifetime. And so because of that and the current system leakage rates that we're seeing on average, the emissions that are reported for natural gas use should probably be doubled. And so that means that the impact of gas devices, natural gas devices, is generally much greater than what you see reported in various pie charts and whatnot.
That's a very good point. Thank you. And I think a lot of people are trying to get away from using the term natural gas to using methane gas, which is more descriptive. Great. So Lynn Morgan asked, if the owner sells their home, does the debt stay with the home?
Yes, it stays with the meter. So the next owner of the home would assume the tariff.
Great. Let's see. Ronald Martin asked, would there be any encouragement of solar water heaters on roofs and time of use electric water heaters as additional means of getting away from gas?
Solar water heaters.
Well, what we have seen in the kind of solar thermal water heaters is that it's actually more efficient and cheaper to use solar panels and power a heat pump entities to use those kind of traditional solar thermal water heaters that are panels on the roof. What was the second part to that question?
Solar, I think BSmart is not really focused on helping to finance solar. Solar right now is has a positive IRR. So it is, if you have the additional capital, you can achieve a net positive revenue from it. But we're really focused. It's really important to ensure that you have electric devices to consume that electricity. So that's the problem that we're trying to solve.
Yeah, the second part of that was time of use electric water heaters. And I mean, I used to hear a lot more about those and solar thermal, but these days it seems like heat pumps are really the way people want to go.
Well, interestingly, today Google is announcing their it's called Nest Renew, and it's something that connects to their smart thermostat, but it will check data on the time of use, how carbon intensive the electricity is, what the cost of the electricity is, and help you manage your devices in your home to use that electricity when it's lower carbon. So those services are coming, and that automation is coming. So each of these new heat pump water heater installs are typically web enabled with that controlled interface, so that can be automated with time of use techniques.
Great. So there are some questions relating to how we get utilities and CCAs to adopt programs like these, which obviously is key. Chris Carrick asks, we have seen utilities fight rebates for heat pumps in several states, in part by refuting the methane leakage rates claimed by environmental advocates. Well, we won't go there, but any indication that this BSmart approach would lessen their opposition?
That's a good question. I'm not sure what the answer is. I think that one of the things that we're clear about, right, is that electrification will increase the revenues and profitability of electric utilities, which is obviously it's seen as an opportunity by utilities that are electric only. It's more of an issue, more problematic for utilities like PG&E that have both a gas side and an electric side. But interestingly, PG&E, it's Pacific Gas and Electric, which is one of the major IOUs in California, has made a number of public statements in the last 18 to 12 months in support of electrification. So I think that PG&E really sees electrification as the answer moving forward. And there have been quite a few studies also that have come out of California that indicate that electrification is the cheapest way and most cost-effective way to reduce our carbon emissions.
I mean, to some extent, this is a self-financing approach too. So you're recovering all this capital that gets invested, whereas with rebates, it's just, one, it's out the door, and two, it's not very equitable because it typically goes to people who could already afford to take these measures on their own. It's kind of like the $10,000 subsidy for Tesla buyers situation. We don't want to see that happen with rebate money. We'd much rather see it leverage loans that can be recovered and maybe subsidize the interest rate.
Yeah, well, related, Wai Tai Quoc says, excellent presentation, brilliant ideas, and very thorough thinking, and asks, I noticed you didn't mention PG&E as a candidate for the pilot. Why is that? Are munis like Palo Alto and CCAs the low-hanging fruit who can get this going most quickly and most successfully, and does the CPUC need to be involved? That's a pretty detailed question. And Jay Powell also asks, who is advocating for this at CCA industry associations and state level via CEC, CPUC, and legislature? I think there are other questions like that too. Really, how do we get this going? How do we get utilities and CCAs on board? What will it take?
Yes, well, getting the word out about this program, it's been an effort between, this has been an initiative of Carbon Free Palo Alto. We have gone around and talked to most of the CCAs here in the Bay Area. We have talked to PG&E, and PG&E is a big beast, but we think that they would be a great candidate for doing this program. The CPUC would need to get involved in the case of CCAs because currently CCAs are not allowed to deploy tariffed on-bill financing. And so it's sort of a technicality that I think could be taken care of pretty easily, but it is a regulatory hurdle at this point for the CCAs. That's not true for the munis. So the city of Palo Alto utility would not have that barrier. We have gotten some interest in deploying a pilot program, both from Peninsula Clean Energy and some positive signals from the city of Palo Alto utilities. But to the extent that any of you out there have contacts that would help, please send them our way. We'd like to get this in front of the right people. I think the legislative route is also an interesting approach. You could imagine, a bill from the legislature that requires the IOUs to start pilot programs in their territory.
Great. Sorry, I just got a text. Justine Burt asked, where are CCs sourcing low interest funding for these direct installs? Are they considering green bonds? Now, I don't know if you've gotten far enough with any to know the answer to that question, but would green bonds be one way to do that? I know you mentioned bonds at one point.
Yeah, I think so. Revenue bonds apparently seem to be the most viable candidate, but I think green bonds could potentially work as well. I think that question has not been explored in detail by any utility that we know of, but the revenue bonds are apparently a very common mechanism that utilities use for capital finance.
Great. I was just looking for a question I saw here. Well, someone asked if this can also be used for commercial buildings.
You want to take that, Brent?
Yeah, I think that we're starting with residential because it's somewhat simpler and lower hanging fruit. But we definitely are interested in addressing, of course, the multifamily, and then there's kind of small office, small business that where the measures there are and the kind of affordability for small businesses, you run into the same issues. So this could also be used in those situations. When you get to large commercial, they've got very different ways of funding and different capacity for funding and upgrade rates. So that might be a different animal because they really don't need these types of solutions and don't see the barriers that we've been discovering in the residential area.
Just to add on to that, we do believe that it's important to really focus on this replace at end of life approach across all sectors, both residential and commercial.
Yeah, so I guess the one approach there would be when you have, say, an ordinance that would require replacement at the end of life, you would just go device by device, measure by measure. So, for example, in Palo Alto here, we're contemplating, at least our utility and staff are contemplating, say, a mandate to make sure that gas packs on commercial buildings are all converted to heat pumps at the end of life. So you know, we don't have the solution from an ordinance standpoint, but that will affect large commercial without having to, you know, involve necessarily on-bill financing or direct installation, for example.
Great, and Craig Lewis is asking, given the complexities associated with tariffs, why not just do a fee-based on-bill financing? Tariffs require complex rate case processes, and fees are much simpler to just add on top of a bill.
So the tariff solves the split incentive issue with renters versus the landlords. And it also solves the issue where a residential customer may be hesitant to incur charges, increased charges on their bill because they are contemplating leaving their home or moving their home or moving out of the area or whatever. And so they don't want that. They'd like to avoid having that additional loan or that additional obligation hanging over their head. So I think we'll have to see, but I think that the tariffs could work, but it's not an absolute requirement. So we could envision rolling out these programs without the tariff component initially, and then working towards upgrading it to a tariff.
Well, and I think one part of this program that's very appealing is that you're getting help with the contractor too, and you have those economies of scale, but also the simplicity. That brings me to a question by Chelsea Hodge. How much time and hours do you expect utility customers will need to put in to participate in the program, to sign up, schedule contractors, meet with inspectors, etc.? What is the marketing pitch to customers that makes it worth this time, plus the earlier than typical upfront cost to participate? Well, I mean, you wouldn't have an earlier than typical upfront cost for the customer. That would be for the utility or CCA, right? But what is the marketing for customers?
I'll try this, Bruce. I think you know, when we say direct install, it's kind of a term of art for the utilities. That means that the utility takes care of the installation for the customer, pays the contractor, and gets that money back from the customer over time. So that's kind of the arrangement. So in our vision, BSmart is just for the utility customer. It's just a check the box here if you want a heat pump water heater installed and have green water heating, and then the utility takes care of it from there. Sets basically the customer would only have to allow access and approve the plans for the implementation.
Now, this wouldn't affect whether it's a tariff or fee-based on-bill financing as far as the rest of the program?
Yeah, that's kind of a separate question of how the bill gets paid. You know, whether it appears as a tariff on the bill, or it just appears as a separate charge on the bill, or they get a separate bill in the mail. I mean, that is somewhat a matter of convenience for the customer, but different arrangements can be made to pay back the installation for the customer. I mean, when we've had conversations with CCEs like Sonoma Clean Power or PCE, they're doing their on-bill financing. They recognize the advantages that tariffed on-bill financing could provide them, but there are some regulatory hurdles for CCAs. So they can more or less start to emulate what we're proposing with BSmart by, you know, constructing non-bill financing where there's no credit checks. You just have to be an existing customer. They just set parameters for the loans that make it very easy for the customer for on-bill financing. But technically that does not address, you know, the split incentive issue that you see that you can address with tariffed on-bill financing.
Yeah, that's an important point. Well, maybe I'll end with this one. Pete Marsh says, I like the program. I also like Rewiring America's approach, for which Senator Heinrich has included modest funding in the reconciliation bill via his Zero Emission Homes Act. And can you compare the pros and cons? I know you did mention Rewiring America, but I'm not sure if you specifically referred to this particular program. Are you aware of that, and what are the pros and cons and differences?
I believe that program was something where they were going to provide funds that communities could apply for, and then it would be up to the community to figure out what the implementation would be, what the program would be. And so I think that Rewiring America, from the 50,000-foot view, the vision that both we and Rewiring America have is essentially the same. The idea that that we can no longer deploy fossil fuel devices, and that financing will play a critical role in this. One of the things that Rewiring America talks about is that if you look at home ownership in America, it was really encouraged through the establishment of the Federal Housing Agency, FHA, and it essentially made reasonable home loans available to customers across America. And so we need to think in terms perhaps of a federal climate agency, which would also enable the capitalization and financing mechanisms that are really needed. The idea is to really, instead of thinking of this as a huge cost, is that it's an investment. It's an investment in our future infrastructure, and the costs can be spread over time and paid off over longer periods of time.
Yeah, and I'm also not familiar with the Rewiring America program, but it seems like this particular kind of program does need to be done at the more local level, right? Probably the state level, correct. State utilities, CCAs. Someone else had asked if it would apply in places other than California, and I don't see why it wouldn't. Probably you could do this anywhere, but it's a tricky. And I thought that was awesome. Yeah, if you don't mind, I know we're a little over, but Craig Lewis has another question. Who says that fees cannot be attached to a meter? I think we're getting back to the fee versus tariff thing there.
Who says that fees cannot be attached to the meter?
Like what? Yeah, why couldn't you attach fees to a meter? So wouldn't that maybe solve the split incentive issue?
That's the idea behind the tariff. And so we're really taking a page out of the success of the PAYS program, PAYS. So there was actually a white paper that was put out last year, which went into more detail about tariff on bill financing. So that white paper I think does not see these barriers. I think there are some state regulatory things associated with CCAs. So call it what you want. I think the idea would be to keep the payments with the meter, and that's the important aspect.
Great. Well, I'm excited about this program. I certainly hope we can get utilities, CCAs to take this up. It's definitely what we need. You know, there's a big hurdle in both the financing and just figuring it all out that this really solves. So thank you so much for this great presentation. Thanks everyone for all your questions and for joining us today. We will send you the slides and recording probably tomorrow. So thanks again, everyone, and have a great day.
Great, thank you, Rosalind. Bye, everyone.